important elections, interesting elections for our platform to follow. And I'm really happy to be here with a couple of experts to guide us through everything that happened last Sunday. So thanks so much, audience, for joining here. We're the European Forum for Democracy and Solidarity, a platform of different political foundations. We try to bring some knowledge and expertise on proceedings and political developments in Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans. So of course, what's on the table in Moldova is really important for us to cover. And I won't do that alone. I'm joined here today by 3 experts. I'm really happy to. Firstly, I'm joined by Dorina Baltag. You're a researcher at the Institute for Diplomacy and International Affairs in London, and you're also the founder of the Noroc Olanda Foundation, which is a diaspora NGO in the Netherlands for Moldovan diaspora in the Netherlands. Thanks so much, Dorina, for joining. It's a pleasure.
Very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks, and we'll come back to you shortly with the first questions, but not before introducing the rest of the session here. So, Ruxanda Vasian, you're a trainee at the Bureau of European Integration Moldova, and also a junior researcher at Noroc Olanda Foundation. So also thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Emil.
And then last but not least, Nicolae Panfil, you're the program director at Promo-LEX Association, election observation NGO in Moldova, and really important on the ground in everything that happened last Sunday. So thanks also so much for joining, Nicolae. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you for the invitation.
So our webinar will take around 1 hour. We'll try to move towards the most of the stuff that happened last Sunday, but of course 1 hour won't be enough to cover everything that happened in Moldova, but we'll try. We also have the Q&A option open in the chat, so you can ask some questions if you would like to, and I will relay them to our audience here. And you can also rewatch the session if you want. So please share it with all your friends and colleagues that are interested in everything that happened around Moldova. So I would like to start with you, Nicolae, with the first question actually on the elections last Sunday. It has been covered really widely actually across Europe. I must say the Moldovan elections got a lot of attention, which is really good to see. And especially one of the main causes of attention was also the risk that were being perceived on the election, like how the election was being done, the disinformation campaigns, but also proceedings during the election day. Of course, you are at Promo-LEX Association. You've done a lot to cover this and to research this. And can you tell something about how the elections went last Sunday?
Well, thank you very much again for the invitation. And hello, Dorina. Hello, Ruxanda. Very nice to meet you again. You know that Promo-LEX being on this market, if I can say like this, for many years now, we learned one important thing, that elections is not only about the election day, for instance, as many tend to discuss mostly the election day, but I hope that we will also have time to cover the election campaign itself, because many things, and you also mentioned some, like disinformation, were mostly done in the eve of elections or in the months of the campaigning. So, but for the election day itself, here in Moldova, we already know this. Most of the polling stations had very calm, very peaceful atmosphere. Usually the elections are without any problems here in Moldova. Of course, those cases of incidents that capture the public attention and are being discussed largely may create some impression that it was very overwhelming situation or stuff like this. And even so, I mean, we also reported a large number of incidents during the election day, for instance, around almost 1,000 incidents. But we should say also that not all of these incidents are also actually problems or actually, how to say, criminal offenses, or do not represent contraventions in their sense. So there is some of them, for instance, like there was a large number of incidents related to the secrecy of voting. And here we may have also the situation of contravention being determined because it is provided also that no one can make public their own ballot either through taking picture of it or showing it in public in the polling station. But it happened, and it happened in 297 cases, 273 cases, sorry. over the country and abroad. And it seems that it is an increasing trend. And here it's maybe a potential also risk of fraud as well, because I mean, a normal citizen would not have a need to make a photo, of the ballot. Why would someone display the ballot? And in this case, it's maybe some sort of pressure, attempt to control the voters' decisions, or maybe even corruption. So, but this is not us to determine that. This is the police to determine. And as we know, for instance, police also initiated 99, if I'm not wrong, protocols on the election day for ballots, for taking photos of the ballots in the polling stations, for instance. But there is also other incidents, like also big in number this time, about 120 incidents of irregularities in the voters list, which are not necessarily, how to say, criminal offenses or contraventions. It's just problems that we need to solve for the future elections. So the role of observer is not to capture or to see only the legal issues, problems, but also to see how the process may be affected actually. And this is about the election day. And of course, you may have heard already about the other, how to say, problems that created some not potential, but created the real issues for the citizens, for instance, from the Transnistrian region to come to vote. Like we had bomb alerts again, and some of the polling stations received this, and also bridges over the Dnistru River were searched by the law enforcement institutions for bombs. Like they were alerts on the bridges too. So all of this created these problems for the citizens to come to vote in some of the polling stations, because they simply had to stop the traffic, and many people didn't have the possibility to come. And of course, there were also situations when citizens had to travel longer to come to the polling stations here on the territory of, on the controlled territory of Moldovan authorities, because some of the polling stations were also relocated a few days before actually in the eve of the election day by the authorities, based also on security measures that had to be taken. Well, all of this created these impediments for some of the voters to actually exercise their vote, specifically those from the Transnistria region. Then, of course, this bomb alerts also happened in some polling stations abroad, as you probably heard, and this is also not new. So it seems that this kind of situations are not real threats, but rather some sort of tools or strategies, or I don't know. I don't want to guess now who did this, but I hope that police will investigate and will come clear in public to clarify who did this and to apply the necessary punishments, because it's the citizens in the end who suffer from this. And the aim was to limit the people's possibility to come to vote freely. Yeah. I should probably stop here, because I can talk only myself probably several hours, but it will not be correct to dominate this discussion.
No, exactly. That's very much true. And thanks, Nicolae, for these first comments. And I would definitely also be curious to hearing more later in the webinar on how you perceive indeed the months before the election. So not only the election day, but indeed also the whole situation around the elections, and also the freedoms before the election day specifically. Moving over to you, Dorina, because we've seen the results. The PAS party gained a majority, a little bit less votes than last time around, but still they have a majority in parliament. They have a reduced share compared to 2021, but what explains this small decline, and do you think it will create any challenges for governing? How do you think it will go ahead, also vis-a-vis the other opposition parties? Thanks.
Emil, once again, many thanks for focusing on Moldova. I'm very happy to see when Moldova is on the map and we're discussing these trends on democracy, on the way forward and the future European future for my home country. It's a very good question, but I will start a bit from a different perspective. I think for many of us, and what you have seen in discussions, in debriefings, and also throughout the broader community, it was a surprise that PAS has achieved a majority. So 50+1 was the hope, but when we were looking at polling votes before, like all the surveying that has been done and the opinion polls, sorry, just before the elections, they were not looking very good. Actually, the results were quite bleak. So I think PAS was getting between 34 and 40 something percentage of votes, and then you know how it is with the polls. Also, on top of that, the circumstance, and I think probably Ruxanda will cover a little bit more on this, there was this huge disinformation and manipulation, and Nicolae already mentioned that the biggest wave started the last 2 weeks, and there was also a diaspora dossier with new ideas of how to corrupt the electorate. But let's go back to your question. Is it a big decline? Not really. They have 55 seats. Okay, now the last news is that 2 of the members of the lists of PAS, they are going to go independent because they joined from Platforma Da. So they have 53. But this, from the sense of creating a government is not an issue. So also they can make their own government, they can pass legislation. So in this sense, I think it's all right. Why this result? I would say the discussions around roundtables are usually that there has been a reform fatigue in combination with unmet expectations, and this doesn't matter what category of the population you are from. You could see that people were unhappy because all throughout the last 2 years, when people were asked, is the country going the right direction, people were saying no. But what matters to the people, European integration it's so complex and it has so many processes and practices. And at some point, you were already tired of hearing everything about the European Union. People want to live good in their own country. What matters to them is job security, is their children's security and safety, a good education system, good infrastructure, everything that you also treasure in the Netherlands, so to speak, which tells us that the Moldovan electorate has grown, has matured. So I would say on top, this needs to be coupled with some communication gaps, and the gap here is it was difficult for the current government, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges they'll have to face, is to explain their achievements in a language that is being understood, but also coming closer to the citizens. If you look at who the citizens trust, it's not the government, it's either the church or the mayor or somebody that they know and they meet on a regular basis. The government is somewhere out there, and usually they feel that the government is out there to get you, not to offer something to you. Whereas these tangible benefits are very important for a day-to-day life. So I think you need to work with in investing in education, but also to work with grassroots people, go into communities, work through health practitioners, through social workers, through librarians, those people that you meet on a daily basis. And this is what we in diaspora did. We went outside of our bubble and we started thinking, how do we communicate with people who are not like us? And meeting face-to-face or organizing ad hoc events or an online get-together over coffee, talking about daily life and explaining what's going on and what is at stake for Republic of Moldova is something that actually worked. Because for me, there are 2 big things. Disinformation does not happen in a vacuum. And I'm not really fond of this geopolitical swaying of the vote, because disinformation has roots in Moldova, or can have roots in Moldova, also because we have polarization. And polarization is not to be put on this government only, because you can't build a house in 4 years. And they also went through 2 major crises. One crisis was COVID crisis. I think that's how they started. And the second one was the the Russian war. So there was a humanitarian crisis, and then we had the energy war with coming from Russia. So I think we need to balance both sides. And they need to learn some harsh lessons in this sense, Emil.
Yeah, and maybe to follow up on like the geopolitical swaying of the vote, can you maybe explain a bit more what you mean by that?
Yeah, what I mean by this, and you probably saw also on the Dutch news, but also the way that this has been presented, but also by us, is that again in this we were asking the electorate to go out and vote and consider the future. These are the elections where we want to remove ourselves from Russia. And if you look in 2021 in the parliamentary elections, we were talking about similar things. If you look at the 2024 presidential elections and the referendum, again, this is you are putting one against the other. So it's like the war of the titans. And I think this should not be the case. I think the discussion for the citizens needs to be about these are our needs, these are our problems. What are the solutions you're coming from? What has been done for me as a citizen in the last 4 years? I think it is time that we move away from only geopolitics, but talking about what Moldova needs actually, and removing ourselves from the EU versus Russia, because it's becoming, it will, if you talk to people and you look at interviews, people are already tired of this discourse, and everyone was saying, please, let's not have in 4 years yet another election where we talk about Moldova versus Russia. Let's focus on difficult reforms, which is health, which is education, the ones which are not really sexy, economics, and obviously making sure that Moldovans people feel that they belong to Moldova, that they are a community, and then it's okay to also have a critical voice and be more inclusive in everything that's politics and policies, because right now for the majority of the population, this is a land very, very far away, and everyone would say, oh, I'm not interested in politics. But politics is at your door every day and it's part of your life. So let's figure out a creative, simple way to be closer to those citizens and include them in the decision-making processes. And it can also be fun.
Yeah, for sure. And that also leads to like a whole broad discussion on how democracy is being perceived across Europe and where it's sometimes too far away from citizens. But it's interesting comments like as I perceive it from how you say it, like also these elections has also been presented in some way or form by the parties as a referendum again on geopolitical matters, while the electorate has really moved on and has matured. So there is kind of a discrepancy there. And also, so you would also say that the parties still are yet to mature a little bit in that sense in the upcoming time again.
Yeah.
I'm interested also to hear a little bit more about what your take on the opposition, how you think they will like be positioned in the upcoming time, but not before first moving to you, Ruxanda. Thanks also so much for joining. And I wanted to ask you more about the European dimension. Because what do you think this result, what kind of effect will it have on the European integration of Moldova? And what do you think are the biggest challenges there for this new parliament to tackle in the upcoming years? Thanks.
Thank you, Emil. So this summer, I actually worked close with the Bureau for European Integration. And I've seen the process of European integration from backstage. And what I can say is that definitely these election results, as Dorina has mentioned, they show clearly that the majority of Moldovans, they do support European integration. So most of the country wants to move closer to Europe. They are also wary of the risks that sometimes remaining neutral or being under Russian influence is not an advantage. So they definitely want to move from this stage. And as Dorina said very well, that we also need to solidify this commitment for Europe because it shouldn't exist out of only a fear of Russia, but also out of conviction for what Europe is, for its values, for its essence, for the fact that Moldova needs to align itself for its own good, not for Russia, but for Europe, to judicial norms, to protect human and minority rights, to achieve energy independence, and all of these values that are right now European and not really Russian. And I would like to say a quick example that Moldova is actually one of the fastest countries to go through the EU accession process at the moment. So this is something that has happened not only because of political will. So this happens not only because the government wants it, but this happened because there are real people that help this progress happen. So right now, we finished our bilateral screening with Brussels this month, and now we are finishing up our negotiations positions on each of the 35 accession chapters. And now we're just waiting for the decision of the Council of the European Union to give us the green light, and so that we can actually start negotiations. And this is amazing how fast it happens, because it's not only the people from the ministries, from the Bureau for European Integration that make these decisions that make this progress happen. It is real people. For example, it is actual farmers who will be upgrading their utilities according to European standards. It's actual judges who will go through the new vetting process for their professional evaluation. It's educators and social workers who will actually work now with the rule of law. So this shows that European integration and these election results are actually a society that is committed to change and not only a government. But now, on the flip side, there is another complex debate that many Moldovans still associate the European Union and our integration with NATO, which, as a synonym, it's an extension to war. So during this campaign, as Dorina mentioned, we've heard countless fake stories of President Maya Sandu trying to start a war in 2026, deploying NATO troops even though we're not even part of NATO yet, of trying to send Moldovans to fight in Ukraine. Countless of these kind of fake stories about war. And now why do they exist? Because the originators who come from the Kremlin side, their goal is to link Europe and pro-European politicians to NATO, which, as I said, by it being a military alliance, it is associated very easily with war. And then what happens when you associate Europe with war? You don't see Europe as a guarantee of security, of deterrence even, but you see it as a guarantee of war. But then the actual goal at the end of this is that it's trying to scare people and implant this fear and make them forget of the real aggressor. Because who is the real aggressor in this day and age? It's Russia, who is actually waging a real war in Ukraine right now. So that's why it's a complex debate, but we see where the balance is tipping in the end. So it is Moldovans that do wake up more and realize that Europe and European integration is where we should be leaning towards.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, those narratives are also quite common. We see it in other countries as well, like for example in Georgia, where also Europe is being portrayed as by the current ruling party, Georgian Dream, as being the party of war, being the party of stoking the war, while of course we see who the aggressors are and who are not. But it's interesting how that's being framed and being used. So thanks for those comments. And Ruxanda, maybe one follow-up question is on, because we now have PAS having a simple majority in parliament, as Dorina also said, 53 seats in a parliament of 101 MPs. So in theory, you would say it should be quite easy to just do all the reforms, to put them through parliament. President Sandu is also president, but of course, theory and reality are often not so closely linked. It will be more difficult. So how do you perceive this? What do you think would be the most difficult reforms and changes that have to be made for EU integration in the upcoming 1 or 2 years for Moldova?
So right now, as I was saying earlier, that if we get the green light, the go sign from the Council of the European Union, that means that we start the negotiations on the first cluster, which represents fundamentals. The cluster one is the most difficult one because fundamentals are the kind of reforms with which, if you don't allow them to succeed and have a very solid foundation, a fundamental, you cannot succeed with the others. So that means that here you have a justice reform, you have reforms with public acquisitions, and these are all very tough chapters for Moldova because now we are in the process of justice reform with, so since 2021 with PAS's previous government. But these are all very wary processes that do take time. And when you don't have a very solid majority or a constitutional majority even, the process can be slow. But then Moldova, again, has a national plan for accession. So this is a plan, an actual document, a book, I would say. It has over 3,000 pages that the government follows. So it says from this year to this exact year, this is what Moldova has to do. So you can't really step outside of these boundaries of what you do on this chapter, on the judicial reform, on agriculture, on the economic criteria and everything else. So I would say that with the majority that they have now, they cannot step out of this plan. They don't know exactly what they have to do. But then obviously, in 2021, we didn't expect the crisis with energy or inflation or the war in Ukraine. So you never know what can happen and what can limit this way.
Exactly. Thanks. That's some good information to know. And indeed, like cluster one is, as it's also called, fundamentals. It's very fundamental to the first steps in the EU accession procedure. So interesting to hear and to follow that, how that will develop in upcoming time with opening and negotiations. We have some questions from the Q&A, so I will move to that in a couple of minutes. But I would like to move to Nicolae because we just discussed like proceedings on election day specifically. But I would also be very curious to hear a bit more about like the whole structural environment before the elections and how you at Promo-LEX assess this. Like how the disinformation campaigns went through, for example, media, how you assess, for example, there have also been reports about big flows of cash and big campaigns going towards Moldova. Can you tell something about that, perhaps about how this has developed in the months before this election? Thanks.
First of all, let me also say that I fully agree with Dorina and Ruxanda on what they commented on, and I think they explained it very well. But there is also so many other things to be taken into consideration here. But maybe I will have a chance to comment also a bit later, just not to forget your question. So as colleagues already mentioned, yes, indeed, the campaign was highly polarized over the country's geopolitical orientation. And also it was even a more intense campaign than in 2021 parliamentary elections and 2024 presidential elections and referendum. We also saw how the elections been more conducted into the into the online space actually than offline space. So it seems that social media is capturing the more and more attention, and candidates are preferring to do more and more campaign there. Promo-LEX mission, we documented a lot of issues during the election campaign, but just to name a few, abusive use of administrative resources, for instance, or electoral corruption and illicit funding, financing of some of the candidates, unregulated activity of third parties. By the way, this is one of the recommendations made by the European Union in their last report from October 2024, if I'm not wrong. So I really hope that there will be also time and efforts put into improving the legislation, as we always do usually after the elections. There is this follow-up activities, and there is a lot of issues to be worked on in terms of legislation. Negative campaigning and smear tactics, as Dorina I think said, the last 2 weeks of campaign were really ugly. We discussed mostly about how to say, this smear campaigns and negative messaging was present rather than programs and candidates and lists of MPs and so on and so forth. The focus on geopolitics came at the expense of substantive public policy debate. So just ask everybody now what they remember from the candidates' policies or solutions to the problems, and it will be probably less than half of the people who will be able to tell you that they recall some of the promises on the economy, for instance, or on social aspects and so on. And we also noticed that candidates seems to prefer less and less participating in debates and rather doing this alone campaign on social media, where they cannot be, given any direct questions or feedback from the citizens that they would. They can avoid easily unpleasant questions or some comments that they do not like, and so on and so forth. So we need these debates. We need candidates to participate in debates, and unfortunately, many of them were absent from the TV debates, for instance, as we could see. The campaign was overall, to say also, or the elections were overall competitive. Still, with all of these problems or issues that we had 23 candidates registered in the race, so citizens had the opportunity to choose from a wide range of perspectives. Even those who were very much known as being, some sort of political agents of Russian Federation here in Moldova were allowed to compete, and basically some of them competed unimpeded. Some of them were also excluded from the race in the last days before the election day, or even on the election day. But nevertheless, the political environment was enabling and allowed for citizens also to have a choice here, which is very important for us. We as Promo-LEX are also members of the Civic Coalition for Free and Fair Elections, and we actually presented today in a press conference the final declaration of the coalition on this elections, and we assess these elections as partially free and partially fair elections due to all of these problems that I mentioned throughout the election campaign period, but also on the election day. And still, I would say Moldova managed to keep its status of an electoral democracy, which is very good, very important to us. I would like to remember that there were a lot of discussions also during the election campaign about some ideas or some intentions, for instance, of some of the factions in the parliament who registered this draft laws on limiting, for instance, the rights of people from diaspora. Or also another idea was to adopt a law, something similar to what the Georgians did on foreign agents. I wouldn't imagine under such circumstances Moldova being able to keep its, status of an electoral democracy, as I mentioned. But hopefully it's not the case, and with the majority now that is clear to us in the parliament, we know that this is not going to be changed. But I would like here in the end also to comment a bit on what Dorina mentioned. I fully agree with her position. My idea is also, I hope that we will not be forced in 4 years, for instance, in presidential elections or in parliamentary elections, to vote again in this dual world that is being created. Like you have to choose either Europe or it's like in a matrix. You have either the red pill or the blue pill. There is no alternative here. There should be, in my view, in these 4 years, first, social cohesion, rebuild, more inclusive parliament work. Yes, we are okay to see that the parliament will have stability, the government will have stability, because this is very much needed for the advancements towards the European integration. But also we monitor the work of the parliament in the last 4 years, and I know that the parliament was far from being inclusive. And those factions that will be in the parliament also represent citizens, and we don't know how they will behave now in this new legislature. But I just hope that they will be more open towards the ideas of different factions, even the opposition, even the so-called less pro-European factions, not to say openly pro-Russian, but I mean, we need in these 4 years to find a way to make it clear for all the political spectrum, but also for the society, that the European integration is not a choice by, you have actually here an opportunity and you also have an opportunity with the Russian Federation, for instance, because there is no choice here. We cannot be with the Russians again. I mean, after being 70 plus years in the Soviet Union, and after having also Russian troops on the territory of the country now even, and Russians doing war in Ukraine, it's clear that it's not an option. So I hope that the politicians will find a way to make it clear that the next debate should be mostly about how we make the European integration. And here we can have all kinds of possible debates. I mean, there is a lot of different parties also in the European Parliament, in other countries of the European Union, where you have social democrats, you have liberals, you have conservative party. It's possible to discuss different visions, but it's not, I mean, by jeopardizing the European integration idea itself, which also should be understood in the country, not as a political or geopolitical, scope. It was presented very simply, by the way. I want to accentuate this by passing this campaign, but I hope that this is only because they needed to express themselves somehow. But in fact, the people should feel the benefits of the European integration. And we were speaking about these aspects here, why they did get less votes. Because in many situations, we are talking about European integration and people do not really get it. Like, how does it look like? I mean, there is a lot of people who travel, who have a better or good life and so on, but also there is a category of like 20, 30% of the population who don't have an idea. They don't go abroad to see the European Union. They need to be presented at home and explain as an improvement in their quality of life. And then the rhetorics to come and to say, yes, this is the European Union. This is the European values and standards we aim for. But only the labels doesn't really help much. So I think they also learned the lesson, because I saw one of the promises PAS made in this campaign is to also take care more about the economics and social welfare of the people in the next mandate. So because what people say is they are afraid of a war, and we saw that this been very much exploited in this campaign by the both sides at some point, but it was also the social and economical problems that and the lack of locuri de muncă, Dorina, if you can help me, workplaces.
Job places.
Jobs, lack of jobs, yes. And then, I mean, other things. And I think this is the direction where the politicians have to concentrate now. In parallel, indeed, as Ruxanda mentioned, with all these efforts to align our legislation to the European Union. So in this perspective, I mean, it's like a double or triple effort that they will need to take, and they cannot leave one or another behind. Like, they need to advance in terms of procedures and efforts with the European integration, but also to bring the society closer to the European Union by improving their conditions of life.
Yeah.
Sorry
Yeah,
for
thanks.
taking longer, but
No,
I
but
hope
it's
I
it merits
managed
some.
to
Yeah, for
complete a bit the
sure.
picture.
And I had also a question with a lot of elements, but also good that you reacted on the comments of Dorina and Ruxanda. So thanks so much, Nicolae. And maybe one follow-up question after continuing with you, Dorina. One follow-up question to you, Nicolae, on this shortly is now the setup of the parliament with PAS having a simple majority and then the opposition on the other side. It does seem like the set up again for like the two sides, like one against the other. Do you see in the first days after the election some where the, for example, the PAS party reaches out to the opposition and vice versa to work together towards the things you just described? Do you see these first elements happening, or is that not the case? Not the case yet?
I really hope that everybody will cool their heads. They have a few weeks until the next parliament will start working, and all the rhetorics from the campaign should be left behind, and everybody should work for the citizens. I'm sure from all the factions, from all the parties that are represented in the parliament, Moldovan people want the same. And if they will continue just with this geopolitical rhetoric there in the parliament, it will be a waste of time. We need this more inclusive parliament. We need them to work together to re-establish the citizens, how to say, people were put in a part. If you can imagine people in one family having like different positions on their political choices, this is not okay. I mean, people cannot fight all the time over the politics only. So they should not encourage this. That's why I said I hope that the parliament will be more inclusive and they will focus more. Of course, there will be attempts, and the Russian Federation will be present in continuation in the political landscape of Moldova, and there will be attempts to, bring all kind of issues that will make them to react or to lose their focus from what is needed to be done. But I also think, and here is an important idea, beyond this building the common sense over the European integration as the vector of the country, and then to debate the ways how to do this, there is a need to continue all this work that the state institutions, especially the law enforcement, started to do, and was very good job, especially in this campaign of the police, that managed efficiently to counter a lot of illegal financing and also corruption of voters. And they also been involved, as I know, in fighting against disinformation even. So it's important that institutions do this work, so that next time we will have less agents, people of Russian Federation here who was doing this kind of job, because of course it's done through the people, through the Moldovans that were accepting. It was politicians, it was media, it was people from the different NGOs, church, and so on. And we need to find ways by the next elections again to limit as much as possible the Russian influence here. And the influence is coming first of all through the money. So if you control the money fluxes, this is going to be much easier in the next elections.
Yeah, thanks. In that sense, as you also described, social cohesion is also one of the big challenges that's maybe not like there in one of the requirements for European Union, but it's crucial to get towards European Union across the society. We have around 50 minutes left, so time goes always way too quick in these webinars. I wanted to move on to you, Dorina, to also follow up on some of these questions, because we also got a question from the Q&A from Casey King. And the question is also to you. His question is, I understand Russia versus EU narrative is not related to normal life in Moldova. So how should EU leaders / media relate to the elections? Be silent or show more support for democracy?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the question, first of all. And I think Nicolae covered much of the ground on this, so many examples of how this should go. I will answer in maybe very briefly, is to reiterate, silence is not the way to go, because this will be used by Russian Federation very quickly. I think when it comes to EU leaders and media to relate to the Moldovan elections, avoid geopolitical framing or not have it at center stage, because Moldovans, as we were saying, don't want to be treated as pawns in a Russia versus Europe contest, so to speak, especially when it comes to elections. focus on democracy, not geopolitics. And we have already talked about citizens' well-being, and this type of topics should come at the center stage. And when we do so, I think for the current government and all parties that want to be in the next government, start your work already today. To me personally, democracy starts for me as a citizen the day I cast my vote. This is not the last day. This is the first day when participatory democracy starts. This is when I start focusing on, and Nico was mentioning, how many citizens actually look at what they promised, looked at their political agenda, and then follow through. And this is our job to keep on doing that because we want to live better. And then the third point I think that I was mentioning was to communicate in citizens' language and go beyond the abstract integration terminology or very legally difficult type of terminology, but mostly on what does it deliver to you? What does European integration deliver? Pensions, infrastructure, clean government, I don't know, better and more secure jobs, and going beyond slogans and using people. So we have so many young people. I'll give just a very quick example. If I look at Ruxanda and many of our colleagues in Noroc Olanda, what they do is they transfer their expertise from junior to senior, consulting the government in different projects or not in different projects, and when it's needed very ad hoc, very pro bono, or doing a traineeship back home, or writing your master thesis on Moldova and then relating it to your parents, your grandparents, and your peers. So that would be a way to go. Sorry, Emil, did you have an extra question or did I miss it?
No, I think this definitely covers it in a way that, yeah, how to cover. That was the main question, how EU leaders and how media in the European Union should also cover Moldova.
I had a different point, maybe what I would like to add, it's not only these two actors, we also need to pay attention to civil society and the work that it does. And Moldova is an example for Eastern Europe in general, for the 6 Eastern Partnership countries. If you look at multiple reports, we have a very mature, a very professional civil society, and it needs to be used and sit at the table with decision makers. And I'm gonna pitch here diaspora, because in diaspora now we also see a clear-cut growing civil society. It is not as mature as it is in Moldova, but it also needs to be brought to the table. We have a lot of diaspora expertise, and this is what Moldova will need in its European integration process.
Yeah, do you agree there, Ruxanda, to move over to you on the diaspora point? Do you think diaspora should play like this role also towards social cohesion within Moldova to prevent like this schism between pro and anti-EU appearing? Do you feel that the diaspora plays an important role there?
Absolutely. And there is a point there that not just the diaspora, because the diaspora are Moldovans that live abroad, some that do actually want to come back to live again in Moldova. So it is everyone who has to participate in this process of, tying us back together, our social material. But the diaspora definitely now, with the expertise that they hold, with the knowledge that they hold, the potential for investment as well back home, they have a huge role in, first of all, communicating what Europe does actually look like, what we just talked about earlier when we said that we need to give real examples of, hey, I live in this country in Europe. This is what I can do. This is what my children have been able to achieve, and so on. But also, they can, of course, bring back investments. And besides being an actor that sends remittances back home, the diaspora has the power to help with economic growth in Moldova, to help also show Moldova's profile to Europe. So, not only have a one way from Europe to Moldova, but the other way around. So to, show our wins and show the beauty of who we are, of what we can be. And they definitely have a big role in strengthening our democratic path, because they can bring those values from Europe and teach us over here back home how to grow it here.
Maybe I'll add a little bit, Ruxanda, do you remember we were discussing this moment of diaspora advocacy, and in some of our events we talk a lot about it, and exactly we were saying for one of our products, which is the Compot podcast, where we liaise with professionals, we started asking them in the referendum, let's tilt the balance, not ask what does EU bring to Moldova, but what does Moldova bring to the EU family? Because the European Union is united in diversity. And clearly so, we also have something to bring. And I think this would be a way, a whole campaign that can be done by civil society to focus on dialogue versus kind of a monologue and one-way street.
Absolutely, yes.
That's a great addition. Thanks. And of course, next to dialogue and a lot of interesting culture, you also bring very good wine. So I'm in that sense also very happy to see the European integration of Moldova. I've got a final question from the Q&A. So I wanted just to pose them to you, whoever wants to answer. It's from Marian Kever 1984. Asked the question, what do you think this result means for the status of Transnistria? So I leave it up to you to who wants
Well,
to
I can
answer.
probably start because I already mentioned this issue, and you probably know, or let me also explain a bit. Promo-LEX has an important record of work and experience there in the region, and we have, I think, more than 40 cases won at the European Court of Human Rights, for instance, on defending Moldovan citizens, but not only citizens, actually inhabitants also from Transnistrian region to the European Court. So we know the region very well. As a human rights organization, we are always posing ourselves on the side of the citizens. And this time, for instance, the authorities decided to reduce the number of polling stations for the citizens from the region, also to reduce the ballots, and also to relocate in the very last day, in the eve of elections, actually, some of the polling stations closer to more secured areas. All of this with the argumentation that there was less participation in the past elections or with the security concerns. So this is the context that led to the situation that less people voted from the Transnistrian region. And unfortunately, we are afraid that this is not what we would see or recommend being part of the integrational process of reintegrational process of the Transnistrian region. We also mentioned in our reports, on the interim reports, that the dossier of Transnistrian region is so complex. We cannot talk only about, election day and polling stations for the voters from the Transnistrian region. Do you know, for instance, that one candidate from a party's list was arrested in this campaign in Transnistrian region because he's living there, and there is some parties who had candidates, Moldovan citizens living still in the Transnistrian region. So the idea is we don't have access for the campaign there, for the candidates there. There is no possibility for the voters there to get their information freely. They are not usually participating as the rest of the country or as the rest of the Moldovans participating in the other democratic processes. You actually risk a lot if you go to a protest to say something on your defense in the streets there, and the citizens do not really know or are not very much acquainted with what is democratic freedoms. All of this impacts them, and all of this also creates the opportunity for those who are not well intended, including Russian Federation here, to potentially exploit this mass of huge number of people to come and to vote against the democratic authorities of the Republic of Moldova, whatever party would be here in power, because this is usually what is being encouraged. But in the same time, as the referendum also showed, but also these elections showed, about 30% of the population of the citizens who came to vote actually voted yes at referendum, and also voted for PAS, for instance, or democratic parties in these elections. So there is a nucleus of citizens who are still very loyal to Chisinau. And there is also these perspectives of the times we live in, the geopolitics we live now, and the social economic situation of the region, the energetic crisis they go through. There's a lot of things that can be used by the Moldovan authorities to, let me use this word, but it may not be totally correct, to impose the democratization of the region, to request more in return for getting something to them, because they managed to get gas, for instance, last January or this year, at the beginning of the year, and there was some agreements made and some promises made also by so-called Transnistrian authorities to Moldovan authorities and to the European Union that they will be releasing political prisoners, that they will be access for the media. You know what? We just got Moldova One, which is the national broadcaster in the cable TV there, somewhere in the very last, at the bottom of the list. And I think it's also for the paid channels. So there is actually no media access as it was discussed or promised. So we need to do more in this regard, because the European integration should also come with the entire country being integrated.
I can follow up, Nicolae, because they have the expertise for so many years and the data. So whoever is interested, I usually recommend have an interview. Go, if you're in Moldova, go visit Promo-LEX and their network as well of people who work with them. But just to answer quickly the question, but I would like to follow up, is that for this government, I think Transnistria should be a top priority on the agenda. We don't have COVID crisis anymore, the energy crisis. There have been so many brilliant solutions with the backup of the European Union, but also other partners of European Union that have helped Moldova. I think when it comes to the war in Ukraine, also this has been managed, so Transnistria has to come on top. And it is a difficult affair, but I will say a bit different what Nicolae said to impose. I'll just remind your audience so that this is not misinterpreted somehow. European Union has always been a soft power, let's say, political entity when it came to its relation to countries like Moldova or Ukraine. And then it added something on board, and it was, if we give you something, you give us something in returns. And that a soft power can also use harsh measures. And I think this is a point which I would like to support. And it comes to this current government, they really can continue using soft power, which they did. And one very good example is that many of the Transnistrian goods are going to the EU market, and it tilted the balance. Usually it was 80 to 90% was going to Russian Federation. This is no longer true, since we had, even before we were candidate status with the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, 77% or so of Transnistrian businesses were on the EU market. So this is huge benefit for their tiny market, which this is what's keeping their economy afloat. And in this sense, this was a very smart move to work through soft power, to work with entrepreneurs, to work with businesses. But now it's time for them to also give back. So if you work people to people, and this is your choice, figure out what are the measures. Because with the pro-European majority we've passed, securing that for our trajectory for Moldova, we will continue aligning to EU reforms, but then we have to figure out, and here where you bring in civil society, here is where you bring, people maybe work with students, work again with librarians. So think outside of the box, work with mass media, have kids shows, since Nicolae mentioned on TV. So make it fun and engaging, so people want to be together instead of being apart, and then the political part should go smoother.
Yeah, thanks.
So, but yeah, to go back and answer shortly, there is not going to be an immediate change in the status quo of Transnistria.
Yeah.
Oh, I can actually, if you guys allow me, give a small guarantee, a final remark with a little bit of hope at the end of our discussion, that from a legal point of view of the European enlargement process, the European Commission allows us transitional periods with certain chapters and with certain reforms. And actually, President Maya Sandu referred to this recently, that the integration process, because of Transnistria, can happen in our case in 2 phases. So this is a thing that the European Commission allows. The Transnistria can join later. If reforms there happen slowly or not at all, they can give us some time. So that is possible.
Exactly. That's also important information. And then interesting to hear your comments there on also what big of an opportunity this is in upcoming years, where there will be no elections for the time to come. I think 2 years will be without elections in Moldova now. So that's
Let's hope so. I'm
yeah,
not
it could
on
change,
board,
of course.
actually.
Yeah, exactly. It could always change for sure. So thanks for this. And I'm checking the Q&A in our webinar very quickly, but I think we're also out of questions and also out of time, which goes way too quick always. But I want to thank you so much, Dorina, Nicolae, Ruxanda, for your comments, for your insights. That's been very interesting. Much more left to be discussed, but let's just stay in touch and hopefully we can organize these things more. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we'll close off the
Yeah.
webinar, and also for the audience, thanks so much for your questions, for watching this, and of course, as I said in the beginning, feel free to share among your colleagues and friends. We will keep it on YouTube, so you can just rewatch whenever. And we will continue with these webinars in the upcoming time. So you can also register for our newsletter via the website www.europeanforum.net. We'll have a webinar again next week on the Georgian local elections, which will be on Saturday. It's also an important topic and a country to put our attention on. So again, to the speakers, thanks so much. Stay in touch and have a nice day, everyone. Bye-bye.